Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? It is almost time for week 6, which means it's time to kick off the waiver wire. And I tell you what, it's a really exciting time here for fans. We've got the NFL back in London. It was great yesterday. I know people weren't overly enamored by the game, but having said that, it's still games in London. And I know we've got another game coming this Sunday as well. I know many people are looking forward to that one. So I hope you enjoyed yesterday. Hope you enjoy Sunday as well. If you are new to the NFL, I hope you really suck in and take advantage of the experience, because even though the games, on paper probably don't look the most competitive or the most exciting, it's still exciting to get to watch the sport live, and it's a great stadium, an atmosphere to soak up and enjoy. This show is the Waiver Wire show. I'm going to run through the Waiver Wire ads of the week. And don't forget, this show is brought to you by manscaped.com, the best in below the men's health grooming. You have the opportunity to take advantage of all their great products, including the Lawnmower 4.0, the GOAT of ball trimmers, and you can get 20% off with the code 5yard at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with the code 5yard at manscaped.com. And you also get free global shipping. So please do check that out. And thank you for supporting the sponsors of our show. So as I mentioned, Waiver Wire, it's week 6. This is the sort of time of year now that we have a good understanding of the teams in the NFL that are good and the teams in the NFL that are bad, and those that are kind of in between. And we also have a good understanding of our own fantasy teams, the ones that we think are going to challenge for titles, the ones that we think are good but probably still need some work, and then those that probably going to crash and dive, unfortunately, and maybe we can still continue to work and get lucky and work hard, and you never know, things can turn around. I've turned around 0-5 teams and 1-6 teams before, but obviously the odds are stacked against you, but that doesn't mean you should quit. You should always try until the very end. Keep setting those lineups, keep rolling the waiver wire, keep making it difficult for the opponents in your league. Don't just give up because if it hasn't gone well so far. So what we want to do is try and progress those teams at the bottom to potential outsiders for playoffs or in playoff contention, those that are maybe on the fringes of playoff contention or are solid playoff contenders into potential title winners, and those that are set for the playoffs to really go deep in the playoffs and end up in the championship game and winning the championship. So the waiver wires is still the best opportunity to do that, far outweighing trades, because this is the opportunity for you to get one step ahead. And as always, we will continue on this waiver wire show to focus on players that are under 30% owned. I might cover a few here that are slightly over 30% owned, but overly for the article in itself and the streaming picks and everything else, these will be predominantly 30% owned or under picks. So what I will say is quite a thin waiver wire. It's the first time I'm kind of lacking a bit of excitement for the waiver wire. I don't think I'd be dipping my toe too much on quite a lot of my teams unless there's something spectacular out there. I think there's a lot of plays and average. I think over the last few weeks, there's been a few players that people have been short on and I've bought into, and they've panned out, and their ownership have now gone over 30%. So I will try and highlight a few players who potentially are over 30% that you can invest in, because I think some players might not be too excited by aspects of this list. We'll start with quarterbacks. Really, there's only one quarterback under 30% owned that's playing in week 6 that I would even want to touch if I need a QB. If I lost Russell Wilson, there wasn't any better options out there, and it would be Taylor Heineke. He is 12.6% owned. He has Kansas City this week, and I know he's coming off the back of a disastrous game against New Orleans. He didn't score a touchdown. Yards per attempt was the lowest of the season, just 6 yards per attempt. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he's proven that he will score touchdowns, he will get the ball in the air, and he will take shots, and he'll take risks, and he moves. He's got that movability to get 40, 50 yards on the ground, which is really important. So all of those aspects mean that Taylor Heineke is the best remaining option out there under 30% owned that you can get on the waiver wire. I wouldn't be going crazy. I mean, I wouldn't be spending much, if any, fab on him at all if I needed an option. But he is someone who will provide some stability and sort of be that mid-range QB2, maybe challenge for the low-end QB1 in some weeks as well. But he does have Kansas City this week. He means he should have to ball out just to keep pace with Kansas City. So that's one. The other one is Trey Lancy, 30.1% owned. He's on bye this week, so I don't think any people are really going to go out there and try and get Trey Lance, which means it's a good time to buy. Didn't again have a great performance on Sunday, but that's not to say that, with that dual running ability that he has, he'll accumulate 50, 60 yards most games. He'll have that touchdown threat as well. He's just trying to figure it all out in that offense. So I think we're after the bye week, I think he comes out much stronger once he's got a week extra to learn that offense and to get used to it. It's one of the more complicated offenses in the NFL as well. So I'd be trying to get Trey Lance now because I think you can get him cheap now. Stash him if you've got the spaces on your bench. And then if you need QB option past week 6, I think he's probably the best bet out there that I'm looking at, the sort of mainstream around that 30% owned. If you need someone else for this week in particular who you think is going to offer you options, I'm looking at ones under 50% owned. There really isn't a lot. Sam Darnold's ownership has jumped up to 47%. I know he didn't have quote unquote the best game this week, but he does have Minnesota. I think that's an opportunity for him to take some shots. That's really it. I don't want Baker Mayfield really low touchdown numbers this season. Trevor Lawrence needs to see a bit more before I feel comfortable putting him in a lineup. Most of the others are on bye, so really that's the limit of the options so far. Running backs is really after two guys who are after sort of vacant backfields where they're looking for talent gaps. First is Devontae Booker. He's 3.8% owned for the Giants, and he has the Rams this week. Now, Saquon Barkley got injured very early in the contest on Sunday against the Cowboys. He's got that ankle. We've all seen the pictures. I doubt he plays this week. I'm not a doctor. I'm just following the advice of fancy doctors and actual doctors and the news, and it looks very unlikely he's going to play this week, which means Devontae Booker should get a significant amount of work. And listen, he's not. We know what Devontae Booker is. We know he's not this elite option. We know he's not gonna, walk in like Alexander Mattison and put up 130, 140, 150 yards. Like, it's not going to happen. But volume is king in fantasy football, and that volume will propel him to an RB2, low end RB2. So he's going to be a startable option, and you can get him off the waiver wire, whether he lasts a week, whether he lasts 2 weeks. I wouldn't be spending loads, 5, 10% of your fab. People will go nuts thinking that Saquon might be done. And do you know what? I don't think he will be, because it is an ankle. It's swollen. It's bruised. We don't think it's broken. Obviously, if the news changes after this goes out before Wednesday morning, then of course change that opinion and change your fab budget. But Devontae Booker is Devontae Booker. He's not spectacular. 2.6 yards per carry last night. I mean, he'll be better than that, but he's not going to be like this elite option. So just setting the expectation is don't pay up big money for Devontae Booker, because it's, one, not a long job from what I imagine, and two, it's not a stellar job. I think he's an RB2 this week. It's probably about what you'll get out of him. So you don't want to spend up big for him, but decent bye week cover if you need him and you can get him. Khalil Herbert is another. He's 4.7% owned. What was interesting is he actually got 18 touches, which is the same as what Damian Williams got. I think Damian Williams was banged up, and I think Herbert's usage will go down slightly, but he did get red zone usage. He did get 75 yards. I don't think he's, again, an elite option. I think he's someone who is going to be an RB3, but if you've got bye week cover and you're desperate, it is thin out there. I do think he's someone who has some value, maybe 5%. Again, maybe up to that 10% to get you through the bye weeks, 6, 7, 8, for example. He has more longevity because of the fact that David Montgomery's going to be out another 4 to 5, maybe even 6 weeks. And he is going to have a role. I think he does get 13, 14 touches a game going forward, at least for the next few weeks. So I think he's worth investing that 5, 10% for that RB2, RB3 fringe, maybe even mid RB3 kind of range. But at the end of the day, because it's so thin, the waiver wire, it's him, or it's not a lot of option out there. I mean, I'm going to look at now some options that are slightly over the 30% owned threshold. Kenneth Gainwell, 36.5%. I'm not sure he's getting that kind of volume. Samaji P. Ryan, I know he scored the touchdown, even though he got loads of usage, but I think they were just being really cautious with Mixon. I'm not so sure his usage stays the same, and he's 32.5% owned. David Johnson, he's certainly not getting that usage. He's 36% owned. Let's see. Alex Collins. Now, Alex Collins is interesting if Chris Carson remains to be out. He's 41.8% owned. He's someone I would have over Khalil Herbert for sure. Ronald Jones, 44.1% owned. No thanks. He has been completely displaced. Sony Michel, I don't think so. He's not getting that volume. J.D. McKissick, potentially, but I mean, he's coming off the back of a game where he was barely used, and he's not going to get much usage next week because they're going to be behind against Kansas City, you would expect. And then you're at 50.9 for Latavius Murray. He's probably another one I would consider. But that's what I mean. It's slim pickings, and you're having to hope that players like Latavius Murray and Alex Collins are free over Khalil Herbert. So that's where it's thin. So that's why I would pick up Herbert, and he's worth some usage. So moving on to wide receivers, Kadarius Toney is obviously the big one to talk about here. He's 12.2% owned, and he absolutely balled out Sunday night against the Cowboys. He put up, he got 10 catches for 189 yards, 13 targets. He obviously got ejected for throwing a punch as well, which is kind of everything about Kadarius Toney. I've watched Kadarius Toney a lot. I'm a Florida Gators fan, and he does have talent. I don't think anyone ever disputed his talent. I think people questioned the volume he would get and whether he'd be used as a gadget player, whether he would be used as an explosive deep ball threat. He's kind of just being used as an alpha. And I mean, if you drafted Kenny Golladay, you're pretty much regretting that instantaneously, and you're pretty disappointed in that. Sterling Shepard, we don't know what's going on with him. Is he hurt? Is he out? So Kadarius Toney is a really good option to add right now. We have to wait and see if there's any disciplinary action from either the team or the league. I don't think there's going to be. I think he will be fine to play on Sunday. And, he does have the Rams, as I mentioned, with Booker. So worth noting and worth paying attention to. But it just at the end of the day, he's got the volume right now. I'm not saying he's ever going to get 13 targets and 10 catches again, because he probably won't. But I do think he will get, I think you can safely book in 7-8 targets a game if he catches 5 or 6 with that deep speed that he has and the ability to stretch the field. He's on to a winner. So I do think he's going to have games where he busts. I think, but as a flex option, bye week option, I don't think there's anyone better out there at wide receiver right now than Kadarius Toney. If you want something a bit more consistent and a safe floor, Tim Patrick's your guy. 29.7% owned. Desperate to get him over 30%. I talked about him. I tried not talking about him. I think we'll get him over 30% this week. He'll have a very quiet game, but very solid. Best fantasy outing of the season. He's had 4 games over 12.7 PPR points, 9 targets. So at the end of the day, Denver threw the ball a lot. Cortland Sutton got all the headlines, and rightfully so. We got a lot of the volume, got a lot of targets, the touchdowns. But Tim Patrick's putting together some very, very decent, solid, like 80, 90 yard games with 6 catches, 7 catches. So that's the kind of thing that is really good for bye week cover. So Tim Patrick, nice safe floor, get you 12, 13 points. Don't underrate those guys. Wide receiver 3, but consistently likely to be in that conversation every week. So he's a really safe option at 29.7% owned. He has Vegas this week as well. So decent matchup for him to exploit. Tight end, really tricky one here. It has got very thin. A lot of the options, Dawson Knox, etc., have all been bought up. Dalton Schultz have all been bought up. So I'm going to go with David Njoku now. Currently sitting, as we are right now, he's the number 1 tight end this week in PPR, and he caught 149. 107 catches, 149 yards and a touchdown. So massive game for him. He became Baker Mayfield's sort of favorite target. He's had a very up and down career, mostly down because of injuries, but he seems to be at his very, very best. Don't forget, this guy was a first-round pick in 2017 in the NFL draft for Cleveland. So they like tight ends. They target tight ends more than any other team in the NFL right now. So David Njoku makes sense, especially off the back of that game, high-scoring game. And even though they lost to the Chargers, they're going to be in another high-scoring game next week when they play Arizona. Expect Njoku to be that safety net for Baker Mayfield, to move those chains, to keep pace. So I like Njoku, especially this week. Don't love him as a whole season kind of play, but for the next week, next couple of weeks, I do think he's a very, very good option. He's probably the best out there in terms of that high ceiling that you could potentially get from the tight end position. The other one is Dan Arnold, 1.3% owned. Now, let's not forget that Jacksonville traded quite an exorbitant contract for Dan Arnold. Dan Arnold was paid in the offseason by Carolina, someone they were desperate to get. Arguably, I reckon they overpaid. And then now, all of a sudden, Jacksonville took on that contract when James O'Shaughnessy went down. He fumbled the ball, but he was still given that trust. He's still got 8 targets. He's still got 6 catches for 64 yards. He did lead Jacksonville in both of those categories. And he's going to be a big part of this offense going forward as they're trying to figure out this offense and try and figure out what's going on. So Dan Arnold, again, say floor touchdown dependent for him to be really relevant. But, I'll take a guy with 6 for 64 at the tight end position all day, every week, twice on Sundays, especially if he's going to get red zone looks. So both those guys I wouldn't be spending huge money on because tight end position. But if you want to get a couple of percent of fab, maybe up to 5% of fab, I don't blame you. The wide receivers, by the way, I missed the fab. Kadarius Toney, I'd be spending anywhere up to 20% of fab because I think he's explosive and he can put up wide receiver 1 numbers. And there aren't many guys on the waiver wire that can do that. Tim Patrick, I think he's got a limited shelf life. We're waiting for Jerry Jeudy to come back. I think he's worth sort of 5 to 7% of your fab max. I think that's the sort of ballpark, maybe a little bit less. Try and get him on a discount because he is an undervalued player because he doesn't have that high ceiling, but he has that very safe floor. And those guys are very worth owning. You could probably get him a little bit cheaper as well. Let's go with the kicker. Kicker this week is Nick Falk. 8.3% owned. Nick Falk is, very, very consistent, good long leg. He's got everything you kind of want from a fantasy kicker. In fact, he's consistent. He's got a long leg. He doesn't miss many. The only one he's missed is a 60-yard field goal against Tampa to win the game in the rain in horrible conditions. Don't know why they even went for that, to be perfectly honest. So you look at those options and think that Nick Falk might be the best one out there. I know he missed an extra point on Sunday, but it's the only one he's missed all season too. So we'll let him off that one. Also, the fact that Mac Jones isn't the most touchdown king guy that you would want at a quarterback. Like he might get a couple of touchdowns, but he's not throwing 4 or 5 touchdowns a game like a Patrick Mahomes, etc. So he's going to get opportunities to kick field goals, and he's playing Dallas this week, so that should be a game where they'll need to keep scoring points, and Belichick will want to keep ticking the scoreboard over. I think Falk could be very, very busy on Sunday. And in the DST, the Packers is my choice. They're 20% owned. They have Chicago, big grudge game. They always seem to turn up for them. Chicago offense is really struggling. I think there's the opportunity to get some turnovers there to really sort of deliver some results. They've been kind of middling, the Packers, D. They've not been too bad. I mean, week 1, they were terrible, but, they haven't been bad. They haven't been good. They've kind of been above average, but not explosive. They're not going to put up these solid 10, 15-point games, but I do think they can get you anywhere from 6 to 10 points this week against the Bears. And I'll take that in my D. It's pretty safe, pretty reliable. You can take that to the bank. If you don't want that, you want to shoot for the moon, then the Bengals DST are playing the Lions, and Jared Goff is always good for a turnover or 2. But that Bengals D, again, in really good situations like against the Jags, just didn't do the business. Didn't score many points. I think they got 1 point. They got -1 last week. There are things just to be a little bit worried about with the Bengals. But if you want to shoot for the moon, they could get multiple turnovers against those Lions, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't think either are worth any fab at all. It shouldn't cost you anything. You should be able to pick them up as a free, late claim if you want to be really sure. Put $1 on them, but I wouldn't be spending anything on them really. You should be able to get those options pretty easily. But that will do it for the Waiver Wire podcast. Just seeing if there's anyone else you could or should own. I don't think there is. I think, as I said, it's quite thin out there. If you're looking for some other options, perhaps a little bit greater owned out there, AJ Green's 38% owned, Rondale Moore 37% owned. Both those guys for Arizona. It's going to be one or the other most weeks, but they should be able to do something for you. Marcus Callaway's 39.1% owned. He's got back-to-back touchdowns in games now. Those are the sort of wide receiver options you can look at. But there's a lot of guys in your waiver wire. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is still free in 40% of leagues, which is just absolutely baffling to me. So, there's lots of guys, even McCall Hardman, but I don't like him as much as some of those other guys. That's why I would never pay up loads for wide receivers, because there's always those sorts of guys, aren't there? I think they're all worth about 4 or 5% of fab to get them. Rondale Moore was utilized in the passing game. He was utilized in the run game. He's got a bit more about him than AJ Green, but AJ Green does get that average of 6 targets a game. So some other options for you to consider. But like I said, that would do it. Thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring the podcast. Don't forget to join me in about 10-15 minutes time for the main show. Flagship show, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a bit of a fantasy football clinic. I'm going to answer questions. I'm going to invite a couple of people on to join me and to talk about their teams in fantasy football and where they're at and how we can help and what they kind of want to know. It should be exciting time, so feel free to join in on that, and I'll try and pull you on at some point. But until the next Waiver Wire podcast, or until the flagship, or whenever I next hear from you next, as always, don't forget, keep rushing.